Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Jasleen Kaur, and I'm a researcher at SikhRI, and I'm excited to introduce Harinder Singh, who is Senior Fellow and Innovation Director at SikhRI, who I've worked with for a while now on the Guru Granth Sahib project and on the State of the Panthic report and various articles. So I'm excited to have this conversation on Beadbi, talking about distortions, transgressions, and responses. This is a topic that we've been talking a lot about because of the two most recent cases in October and December, and it's just been on our minds. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Welcome, Harinder Singh. I think it would be good for us to start with just sort of introducing why it is that we wanted to talk about this. So if you could tell us why, we've been thinking about this topic, that would be great.
Well, Gur Fateh, first of all, and it's nice to have this conversation. We have a lot of these informal ones, and now we get to have it here because we are having this conversation because you said you want to have this conversation. This is important. One of the things we talked about was that sitting here in diaspora, are we able to understand what these Beadbis really mean for us here, for people who are facing it in the ground realities, and somehow providing a context in the politics of Punjab, in the Sikh politics, and larger issues which are affecting Sikhs. So I think there are varieties of reasons why we need to be having more of these conversations, especially given that the tumultuousness and the political volatility in Punjab and the elections around. So it's pretty timely. So we're having this conversation because you asked for it.
Yes.
I think you asked for it on behalf of folks like yourselves, right, in the diaspora, who may watch a particular video or a tweet feed and are wondering what exactly is going on here. Do we have the full picture?
Yeah, I definitely have been thinking a lot about like my position as a diaspora Sikh, so far kind of removed from that news and from the context around it. And so I think like when all this was in the news, it was really hard for me to kind of parse out like what is even true about each particular case. And also there was so much that I didn't know about the larger context around Beadbi. I think we all have a tendency to focus in on like what is kind of not even sensationalized, but what is focused on in the media. And so it was really helpful for me to have those conversations with you. And I think that like, if I'm feeling this way, then there's probably a lot of other folks who are just as far removed and kind of overwhelmed by trying to sort through things and understand the larger context. And so, yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation that's kind of geared towards understanding Beadbi and its context on a larger scale than just like the things that we might see more immediately in current events. I think my understanding was very limited before.
And to be fair, Jasleen, this is a conversation which lots of people in Punjab and Delhi and India are also having. I remember getting phone calls from some news reporters, also people who were writing about it. I know I had a couple of conversations when the incidents took place in some of the media circuits as well. And there are Sikh lenses missing to the conversation. And I'm not claiming that I have a complete Sikh lens, but we do have a perspective as to how to also look at this, because most of the coverages are not providing enough of the Sikh lens. They're still framing conversations mostly on a particular event or incident without the macro picture.
Yeah. And I think along that vein, if we can kind of jump into the conversation, at its like most basic level, I'd like for us to understand what Beadbi is and how it is defined in a Sikh context, because I know that we talked a lot about these words like blasphemy and sacrilege, which are such so like rooted in sort of Judeo-Christian or like Abrahamic ideas. And so I was wondering if you could define Beadbi to answer the question of like what really is Beadbi and where does that word kind of come from, and how is that like situated in our context rather than in the kind of English translations that we see.
Yeah, and it's very important to go back to the words themselves because every word has its own connotation, its own background, and its own politics.
Mm.
So, Beadbi, if we start there at a very simple premise, this is the most common word used when we use it. Sikhs uses themselves not just when there is a sort of a as the world is calling sacrileges and other things of that nature, but we use this word when we are also not able to give a complete level of higher level of respect in a particular way. So actually the word is adab, and it's an Arabic word, and in Be adab means without adab. So we got to understand what adab is. It's not it's a word which we have in Punjabi even, because Punjabi is not an analytic language, it's synthetic, so it brings meanings from where it starts. So it's Arabic, and then it traveled to us through Persian and other literature. So we have those Islamic and other influences as well. So the background is that. And the adab actually in Persian means it is related to words like education and culture and good behaviors, even sometimes politeness and proper demeanor. So I say it is largely associated with the word ethics, as we'll call it today. And when this word gets invoked in South Asia, when it's coming from Persian and Islamic angles, in Urdu and Punjabi, it's used even today. And the word Beadab and Beadbi are become synonymous. And when it has come to today's usage in Punjabi or Urdu, it is really meaning disrespect. Some indecency is going on. There is a disrespect going on. I am going to get into and use the word that there is irreverence going on. Be-adab, without reverence or irreverence. So in the Sikh parlance, you can say when the word adab or opposite of it, be-adab or be-adbi is used, it really is going into the ideals of reverence. How do we think about this? How do we articulate this idea of be-adbi? And how do we practice or not practice? So how does this reverence get played out or not played out, especially in reference to the Guru Granth Sahib? And then there are protocols related to all of this, which is what we call what is the maryada then, right? What is the discipline or the protocol such that we are able to give the highest levels of reverence? So that's where the word is coming from. And it's largely invoked for Guru Granth Sahib, but really it's the spirit of it's invoked for the Guru. And the form of the Guru we have is Guru Granth Sahib as well. And any form which has Shabad, then it gets passed on to those levels of adabs. So we do not become be-adab to it, which means we need to provide the highest level of reverence.
Yeah. I think that leads me into kind of another thing that I've been talking about or thinking about. We've been talking about, but I've been thinking about a lot too, is like our, in reference to our relationship with the Guru and with the Guru Granth Sahib, like what does Beadbi sort of mean? And I think that like in order for us to understand this larger kind of context around these current events and around Beadbi in general, we also have to understand like what our relationship with the Guru Granth Sahib is, both as like individuals and as a collective. And I think like we know kind of like logically, or we hear it a lot that like the Guru Granth Sahib is the Guru, is this living Guru. And it's like even part of that kind of like 5-minute sort of pitch that we do when we're kids to other people of like, why do you mata dick? And why do you do these things? And why do you cover your head? But sometimes I think it's easy to forget that. And so I was wondering if you could kind of break down the like relationship that we have to the Guru Granth Sahib as a living Guru, so that we can kind of understand the depth of that relationship before we get into any other kind of conversations about Beadbi.
Yeah, and I think you raise interesting sort of a point, which is already living in the Sikh psyche. And that's why when you say as a child, we understand or we are accustomed to treating or respecting or giving a reverence to Guru Granth Sahib in a particular way and extend it to Guru and other things associated with the Guru. So look, it comes out of the Guru, and Guru for us is when we invoke Guru Granth Sahib, it is not just a book. So when we talk about what is Guru Granth Sahib for us, we have to understand the Granth part is what makes it the anthology. And this is why when we say it is not just a book and it is not a book, that's what's behind it. It's our Guru. And Guru is perfection for us. It is not even just wisdom of just any kind. And it's constant for us, which means it's not changing. And Sahib makes it who we take orders from, who do we treat as our sovereign. So Guru Granth Sahib is an eternal sovereign for us. It is akin to, when we call it a living Guru, that the Guru lives amongst us, which means Guru is living with us through Guru Granth Sahib. And we see this, regardless of the level of observation of Sikhs, whether they keep here or not. And I'm saying it intentionally because we need to understand how this applies to 30 million Sikhs, whether we have taken Amrit or not, or whatever other things we may or may not do as an observant Sikhs of a particular kind. When somebody is born in our house, when we are getting married, when somebody dies, when people are taking Amrit, it is the Guru which is invoked at every level. So this is very much part of Sikh psyche. It is seen throughout Punjab and it also in diaspora because we invoke the Guru as the one who's present in the ceremony, in the not just the ceremonies, but in every environments where we are invoking something in the name of the Guru. In fact, literally even, when we say in English, we'll say how many pages Guru Granth Sahib has, and we say the standardized form has 1430. But in Punjabi and in the original parlance, we end up saying Ona de kinne ang ne, and ang is literally a limb. So this idea of a living Guru, that the Guru lives among us, lives among Sikhs through the Shabad, and Shabad, that wisdom, that idea of word is available to us in the anthology, which we now call Guru Granth Sahib, because anthology has been elevated to the level of Guru and an eternal sovereign. So this is really a departure from Indic traditions of religious text, as well as Semitic traditions of religious text, because the level of reverence they pay is maybe only at a thought level. For us, it goes beyond thought. We see it as practice in culture and society. It is in deed, it is in action, and hence all the paraphernalia which goes with Guru Granth Sahib, in presenting it as a royal who is present among us. So it is a very, very different relationship. It is not just a relationship of scriptural understanding or thoughts and productions of thought and knowledges. It is anything and everything that we center our lives around it.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about just our the sort of physical relationship that we have with it, of this is who we, this is who we bow to. This is who we sit behind with the fly whisk. This is who we cover with royal fabrics, right? There's so much that is in our day-to-day kind of lived relationship with the living Guru that I think we can kind of come back to if we're ever kind of venturing into that mindset of oh, it's just a book, because it's not. So I think that's all been really helpful for me, and I hope that helps other people. I know that we sorry.
But I wanted to actually say something more to that. So yes, it's not just for us also. I think anyone who's studying us needs to understand this sort of a unique relationship Sikhs have with the Guru Granth Sahib, because the relationship is not only with the Granth, and that's the differentiation. I think it is in our psyche, we may not understand it fully until something happens, and then people don't know how to react to it. Well, we react to it based on our relationships. And the relationships as individual Sikhs, as well as collective Sikhs, is something much bigger than a religious text. It is, if you want, it's people say there is, in America, you say, George Washington is sort of like the father of the country. I'm using American context here. Well, in this case, Guru Granth Sahib is the Guru, father and the mother and the friend and everything else, all the relationships you can imagine, of at least 30 million people who call themselves Sikhs, and many more. It will actually run into possibly up to a billion if you count others who believe in more than the text part of it as well. So the relationship is that this is my sovereign, my living Guru, my existence, my ceremonies, my thinking, our tough decision makings are all dependent on this source of not only knowledge, but this source of life. That's the relationship.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. I know that like we had talked about like whether Beadbi or like Beadab are words that are kind of invoked in the Guru Granth Sahib, and I know that the answer to that is no. But we had talked about Bhai Lal's invocation of this word, and that's been really helpful for me. I'm really interested in the understanding of Beadbi as an internal thing. So it like begins with this internal reflection on our like reverence in our individual like relationships that we have with the Guru and thus the Guru Granth Sahib. So we did talk about things like that we do in our personal relationships of like not being intoxicated and covering our heads and taking off our shoes and doing matadik, like all these things that we do to express that reverence. And I wanted you to maybe dwell a little bit on that sort of exploration by Nandlal, because I think maybe sometimes we're worried about like a kind of slippery slope argument of like, okay, well, if this is how we react when people are doing this kind of Beadbi, then what about if people have like alcohol in their home, or if they don't cover their heads at home, and like these kinds of things where it becomes like a worry about like policing in that individual relationship. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the external and the internal reverence that Bhai Nandlal gets at.
Absolutely, and I think let's start with where you invoke this external part first. I mean, if you think about the protocols of the sovereigns, whether you agree that's your sovereign or not, everyone has to follow those protocols if they want to be in the vicinity of that sovereign. Mm-hmm. That's how Guru Granth Sahib works. That's why if you go to gurdwaras throughout the world, and I know many in the West may not post these signs, but I've seen even in the West this happens. But throughout India, it's very, very clear. Outside every gurdwara, it says very clearly that you cannot walk in with the shoes, you cannot walk in with alcohol and tobacco consumption, or which means you're consuming or drunk with it, and you cannot walk in with your head not covered. So it's those things are understood because those are the minimum protocols, right? And there is something much more. So when you do something worse than that, as the words get invoked like desecrations and sacrileges, which we'll get into, what they're really meaning is you cannot physically, as we say, manhandle something. If you cannot physically do certain things to a sovereign, there will be reactions to that. But the way, as you went into this, I was also curious, where is this word coming in the Sikh text? In our traditions, and Bhai Nandlal Goya in his composition in Zindagi Nama actually invokes it several times. And I know you and I are also working on this article, and which is kind of outgrowth of our discussions as well as this podcast. And for that, I had to go find translations, and I'm like, okay, where do we locate this? Where is this word entering? And Bhai Nandlal, who better individual who's telling us how to be in the adab of the Guru, right? How to be in the reverence of the Guru. That's the word I'm choosing to use. And I actually want to recite a couple of those original lines because I think they're quite profound. And they're not just poetic. Then we have to use those incredible poetic reverences for our purposes, for this discussion as well. And he uses that, and the line he says is, Be adab hargiz bahak rahe nayafat, rahe hakra reach gumrahe nayafat. So that's one of the shares. And then he continues, Hadiye rahe khuda amad adab, be adab khalisat az altafe rab. And you can probably relate to some of the words, the word Rabb is used here, the word Khuda is used, and it's talking about Haq, which is equivalent of, as we say, Koankar. And then the last one I'll invoke here is Be adab rahe Khuda ke dandash, har kira keher Khuda mirandash. Obviously, my Persian is not how they will speak in Afghanistan or in Iran, but the point I'm trying to make is that Bhai Nandlal uses the language where the word is coming from and contextualizes it for us, what kind of discussion we should be having with these words. So, for our discussion, simply look, he's saying three things. First thing he's saying is that the one who is be'adab, which means irreverent one, has never found the way to the truth. And the truth here is with the capital T, which is invoking the one, the Koankar. And then a stray one, the one who is lost in the world, did not find the way and the truth. So the first thing it's being told is, if one is irreverent, they're lost in the world and they cannot find the one. That's the point. That's how the word is used. And then the second one thing he's showing is that the way to Khuda, the way to the divine, is through reverence. Reverence is what shows the way to the divine, the way to Khuda. And it's the irreverent one who's bereft of the grace of the divine, or the Rabb is the word he used. So it's very interesting because Rabb also means this idea of sustainer and the cherisher and the nourisher and all these Arabic words which are invoked. But the idea is of the one. And the third point that he makes is, how can irreverent one know the way to Khuda? How can the one who is irreverent know the way to the one, to the Ekankar, who has been damned by the havoc of Khuda? Kahar word is used, And the point here is, like, irreverent one cannot discover the way. Irreverent one cannot know the way. Irreverent one can never find the way. And it's only the reverence which will show us the way. So that's the first invocation that I am aware of in the Sikh text. And this is at the time period of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj. It makes a lot of sense because protocols are being developed at that time. Our rahats, our maryadas are coming into writings and explorations. And this is how organizing of the Sikhs is happening. And when this organizing of the Sikhs is happening, Bhai Nandalal Goya is asking us to really think about the individual's reverence towards the Guru. And out of that is developed the collective reverence towards the Guru.
Yeah, that's great. I've been thinking a lot about like that community practice of external reverence, like what we do as a collective. And so, we've talked about protocols that we might have when we're like in Sangat with one another. But I also, something that was kind of mind-blowing to me in a way, was like this realization through our discussion of like part of our ability to show collective reverence is like through a refusal to accept Beadbi. And then to take that a step further, that like our refusal to accept Beadbi actually goes into an additional collective reverence, which is like to respond in some way. And that through that response, like if we can see our responses as a form of reverence, I think that like we can start to understand them a lot more, especially if we're far removed from them the way that like, that we are. So yeah, I think that was like a thing that really hit me. And I think I'm still thinking about it. I'll probably be thinking about it for a while. Is there anything that you want to say on that?
Well, I think I want to double down on it because I don't think it's understood. This point about that when we are responding to it in our individual capacity or in our collective capacity, and we can talk about some of those examples, that in itself is a form of reverence. And this is, the lines can be invoked from Guru Granth Sahib regarding this. Like, how do I talk about the greatness of the Guru? How do I deal with people who are not invoking that? What is my response to when this is not happening? And there are varieties of explanations of those shabads for different contexts as well. But this itself, responding to irreverential behavior, is a form of showing a reverence as well. Now, how people respond is, they range from protests, they range from doing part, they range from reasoning, and then all the way when you see systematic and widespread usage in history and otherwise, they range from, responding to it beyond non-violent means as well, because some of this is emotional. Remember, what is our relationship with the Guru? So the both internal and external, we are not as focused as people on what is wrong and what is right. Absolutely, right? It is about what is my relationship asking me to do about it. So in one case, it might be that 100,000 of us sit on a protest and we say, this is really not about individuals who are doing this. This is really about, there's a political game at play. In other cases, it might be, what, I know that I'm an irreverential one, but I still want Guru in my house, and I'm going to invoke in the best of my capacity as to how to treat the Guru, as to how I open it, what kind of space I put the Guru, and what kind of rumalas I put. So everything is part of this. I think what we need to understand is the personal reverence is what drives the collective reverence. The protocols are very much there as to how it needs to be, but our responses are born out of that. So I just want to come back to that. Responding to it is equally part of it. Again, what response is more apt or not apt is a debate we can continue to have. And I think people have been having those debates. But it needs to be understood that that is part of showing a reverence. And then the first part, this, I think you said it, but internal and external, how it comes together. I want to come back to that a little bit. Look, it comes together because everything in Sikhi is internal and external. This is the debate we have in theology as well. And the debate eventually ends there. That yes, we need to understand the literalism, and yes, we need to understand this interpretive nature. You separate the two, then people will be saying same thing about now. Do I only say it from my mouth, or do I only become like the now? Well, it's both. The one cannot be separate from the other. Similarly, when the poetic things come within Guru Granth Sahib, and I'm invoking this on purpose because when we start separating internal and external, literal and figurative, all these things become very sort of diabolically opposing views, but they are not. Similarly, our internal relationship drives our external relationships. Our internal reverence drives the expectations and protocols on external reverence. And that really needs to be, I think it is understood and practiced by Sikhs. Some of us who are removed from certain practices or are not aware of certain practices may find it startling when something happens. But this really is our history. Our history is the relationship between the Sikh and Guru is bidirectional, and we do everything in their capacity, in their personal capacity, in their Panthic / collective capacity to maintain that relationship, that sanctity, and that sovereignness.
That's great. It kind of like, it very smoothly kind of dovetails into something that we've also talked about, which is that like the variety of responses and understandings. And so something that you had said is like, okay, if, we know like realistically, if the Guru is of 30 million Sikhs, then among those 30 million, then there are going to be like a variety of different responses and different ways of responding, and even like different opinions on what is the best way to respond. So I guess my question then is that like, even with that diversity in response that we've seen in our history, like what have we collectively as Sikhs understood about the issue of Beadbi, and what, and also kind of additionally, like what collective responses or mechanisms have we used in the past when it comes to this issue?
Well, so we will say that when something is dealt at the collective level, and this is where it starts to become gray, and we must accept it's gray because we are not the people of the law. Remember, I'm going to keep coming back to it. We are the people of the spirit. And in spirit, many things are accepted and understood as well, because we are not going, it's situational, it's emotional, and many other things happen. So in collective Sikh history, we have seen all sorts of things. The responses have ranged from, as I said a little bit earlier, that, and in fact, let me bring some native terms to this. This protest idea. Protest is English word. We are used to it now. We have seen it in last 5 years. But our words used to be morchas as well. That's our word. We will have a morcha. Morcha has been regarding Guru Granth Sahibs and langars and akhand parts as well. So the idea is that this idea of civil disobedience is the word we are now used to. It's actually that we may choose to just sit and do part. We may choose to just block the police or the railroad access. 100 years ago, we did it under the British. We have done them in last 5 years as well. So that's one form of it. The other forms have been when there have been extremities and many things tried, there have been militant responses to it, including with arms, including the term actually has been soda. And we need to understand that. And I know we are in 2022, and I understand some people are uncomfortable with it, but this is what happens. Soda or sodana, which is the verb form of it, is actually when it's being corrected. And in correction, there have been incidents, including in Darbar Sahib complex, including not in last year, but hundreds of years ago, including in 18th century, where emotional response has been, you know what, enough is enough. And if this is how you're treating physically my guru, I am going to physically stop you as well. And that's where the word Soda comes in. I know sometimes it gets hyper accentuated and amplified, but the incidents of that are not many. But when that incident does occur, because we don't have the context, it gets blown out of proportion. So that's been another way we have responded. And there can be. So anyway, I think I'll just stop there for a second and see if that answers your question, because it ranges from doing some sort of a civil disobedience to all the way in some very, 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 very extreme and limited cases, physically responding to it with arms as well.
Yeah, no, that does answer my question. And I think, the follow-up to that is how we've dealt with this, with sort of the systematic, I know we called it, and I agree with this, this political issue, because it's so widespread and so entwined with the politics and the sort of political sphere. How have we dealt with Beadbi Panthically? I know you had talked about a Sarbath Khalsa, so I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, the 2015 Sarbath Khalsa.
Yeah. I think we have mechanisms. You've invoked that earlier. So we do have mechanisms to deal with some of this. When it's a deliberative work, when it's systematic and widespread, which, by the way, in last 5 years it has been. We should talk about that a little bit. Yeah. And I'm not using those terms, gently. It is. In last 5 years, even if you go by the National Crime Bureau's data in India on the most number of quote-unquote sacrilegious cases in India, they have been registered mostly in Punjab. Number one state is Punjab, which means it is happening a lot. The last count has been that there have been about 400 cases in last 5 years. So this is not one or two incidents where a physical response is when it makes it to media. But there have been two commissions which have talked about this. We can go back 40 years ago, there was a commission set up to deal with it, and their report was never made public. Nakodars, its anniversary just went by, the Nakodar incidents, and now we have Bargadi incident, where a commission was set up. Its report was also, the second part was not made public. What people need to understand is this is happening a lot. It happens quite a bit. When you say 400 cases, and number one, according to even government statistics, and Panthically, so how do we deal with it? Look, even Akal Takht Jathedar, who is appointed, the current one, the SGPC appointed Jathedar, he has also had gatherings and conferences on it now. Now, what happens is we are in a political climate. It's a political problem. It needs a political solution as well. So Panthically, this is where things get involved. Political parties talk about it, they invoke incidents, but they don't do anything about it. Sometimes they do things about it. Both Akali government and the Congress government actually said, let's make this something more than a 6-month or a 3-year sort of a punishment when people do this, because in the case of Sikhs, this is not just a religious text. It is a living guru. And how will you handle something on the charges of manslaughter, for example, like that? So actually, Punjab government under the Akalis passed a bill which asked for sentencing up to 20 years, which is a lifetime sentence. National government of India, they actually said, no, this is not secular enough. Then the Congress government has passed a revision on that to include other religious texts. Even then, Indian government has not done anything. So Panthically, what happens is you can have conversations in gurdwaras at a local level. When it becomes more systematic and widespread, we have conversations regionally. We even had a Sarbat Khalsa was invoked in 2015 on this, because there were incidents which were not dealt with properly by the government as well as the Sikh political parties and the state of Punjab. And not just that, it was orchestrated to create pardoning of Gurmeet Ram Rahims at Akal Takht Sahib. So actually the Ras Sarbat Khalsa was invoked and called for by citing incidents related to Beadbis of Guru Granth Sahib and not dealing with it, but actually creating and orchestrating pardons of people who are associated partly with those, in case of Gurmeet Ram Rahim, who runs Dera Sacha Sauda, who actually, again, to make it more timely, who was just released for 21 days because Punjab is going through elections. So I want to talk about that as well. So Panthically, how we have dealt with it is this. In locales, through our Gurdwara conversations and figuring out what is the best way to deal with it. Because sometimes we do understand it happens in ignorance, right? Sometimes it happens because Sikhs their own faults. Like when we have our own fights in Gurdwaras and then when the police comes there with shoes. So we have to deal with those things as well. So our local Gurdwaras deal with it, local Sangats deal with it. We are struggling with it in our personal reverences as well, while we demand external reverences. At the same time, we deal with it by going all the way when even Akal Takht fails or it's being manipulated through its Jathedars and the Panch Pyares, then we have gone all the way to calling Sarbat Khalsas to deal with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this, like I didn't know before we had our first conversation, and I think it really like puts so much of this focus on the two most recent cases into a much larger and more complicated, and like frankly, from where I'm sitting, like much more frustrating perspective. And so I know we only have like 10 minutes, so I do want to ask a couple more questions and kind of close up this conversation. Hopefully this is helpful for people the same way that it's been helpful for me. I think, we've talked about our institutions failing us. We've talked about governmental institutions failing us. And something that I've been really thinking about, and I know I've talked to you about, is that like, so much of the context and nuance around Beadbi is actually not even directly about Beadbi. Like it's also about the realities that we see in Punjab that we are far removed from. And we've talked about like the gap in understanding between Punjab and larger India, and then also the gap that exists in understanding between Punjab and the diaspora. And, something that we've talked about a ton is like this way that we forget just like the history and the sort of trauma of our like community that exists largely in Punjab and not so much in the diaspora. And so like this long history of trauma and incitement of hatred against Sikhs and genocide and mass killings and disappearances and even just like the constant sort of unease that you can feel as like a Sikh living in Punjab. I think it's really important for diaspora Sikhs especially, and even people who aren't Sikhs who maybe live outside of that context, to really like understand as much as they can. Because it becomes really easy for me sitting in Maryland to say like, shouldn't we be more thoughtful about this? And I think in our initial conversation, that's kind of where I was going. And instead it's like, how can we understand the way that trauma and that history compounds in these like situations that require a much more kind of like quick response in a lot of ways. And just like, as I said, a little while ago, like the frustration with being kind of like discounted or ignored, or disregarded when you do try to go through like the channels that are like legal, and governmental or even Panthic, right? So, I really want people to leave with that understanding, or at least try to pull themselves into that understanding. Maybe it doesn't happen today, but maybe it's something we can keep reminding ourselves of. And like with all that being said, like understanding sort of the entwined like politics and sort of failures of governmental agencies and the context of like, trauma and history around all of this. I did want to talk about those two events just at the end. I didn't want it to be a focus of this conversation, but talking about the October incident at the Singhu border, which involved, Nihangs and the media calling it torture or lynching, and there were elements of things that didn't sit right with me, where it just felt like going too far, if I can say that. So I wanted to know, like, sort of what your thoughts were on how to make sense of this, while also like acknowledging that this is one of over 400 cases in the past 5 years. But yeah, just like this element of sort of torture, quote unquote torture, really didn't sit right with me, and I wanted to talk to you about it.
Yeah. So let's go back to it's political, right? So we must understand this politically. It's a political problem because 400 cases are pending. We have 40 years ago, a commission was set up to deal with it. It didn't do much. In fact, end up killing 4 Sikhs. And 5-7 years ago, when this happens, it end up killing 2 Sikhs, and commission is set up and nothing happens. And you have 400 cases of it. This is the lived reality for most Sikhs in Punjab. Okay? In that lived reality, you have election time. Before that, every government, both Akali and Congress, the 2 ruling governments, said they will do something about it. Nothing has been done. Okay? Now you have election time. Before elections, they were invoking, but during election, they've actually released somebody on it, and all the deras and the dera politics and desecration politics is not even talked about at all. So what happens is there is a lot of pandering to it. Even when the parties have come together, the ruling parties and the Sikhs have come together to work with them to actually even pass legally certain measure, nothing has been done. That's the end. At the end, that's what has happened. In that context, when a Singhu thing happened, this is where at Singhu border in October when the incident happened, you saw the videos, I saw the videos, I got asked about it. And what we need to understand is this is one incident out of 400, as you said. And even then, we didn't have the full facts. How many of the people have gone back to see the reports of that lawyers who went there, 5 of them, and they did investigative reporting as to find out what really happened? And what they did conclude was this, and they submitted their report, just like they had done in at least 3 other prior incidents. And what they basically said was this: look, yes, at minimum, we can establish that there was, quote unquote, this desecration of a kind. Yes, it did not involve Guru Granth Sahib, but where the person was involved, it had space for Guru Granth Sahib. It happened to be in this case, and there are secondary text tradition of the Sikhs, which involved Sarab Granth. But it did take place. And the reaction to that was something is not right because the person had showed up only a few days earlier, and today he was dressed as Nehang. So they cut his limb. That did happen. But the context of that is this again. We must remain sensitive and reverential towards the Guru. We must also honor and not do things which are torturous in nature. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. But in that moment, how many people can figure out what to do, and they're reacting to the best they can? I say this knowing very well that there are more things at play here as well in all the incidents. But at minimum, we need to understand this. It happens. In if somebody walked into your house and you discovered something is not right with your mom or dad, how will you react? Do you have time to do certain things? That's the question. This is a question not just for Sikhs. All ethicists, remember, Adab has to do with ethics. They're dealing with these questions all the time. Jurors have to deal with these questions all the time. We may not like the outcome, but this is what happens at that time. So I'm just bringing the human angle. The Sikh angle is very clear that we must remain vigilant towards our own reverence and then interpret the external reverence the best way we can do certain things. And that's where the word Soda does get invoked. But 1 out of 400. Second incident you mentioned, let's talk about that as too. That happened at Sri Harinder Sahib. I mean, it's a 2-month anniversary, I think, this week of that incident. It happened where jithe duniya matha tekdi. So let's think about that for a second, where the whole world goes to bow. Even those of us Canadian friends who still bow to the Queen, even she went there to bow, right? And that's the context. The whole world goes there, even today. Even after post-84, when they try to stop this reverence of the world, not just the Sikhs. For Sikhs, it's the Guru. Even there, this incident happens, where the person is on tapes. We also know SGPC has a task force and they are not able to stop the individuals. But since then, what has happened? Well, guess what? They also set up special investigation team. and they have not concluded their work. So just like there are commissions, there are teams being set up. But at that moment, just imagine if where Queen is supposed to start a session in a parliament, a special session, and somebody attacked the Queen. What do you think will happen at that time? That's why you have Swiss guards everywhere, right? Their job is to react to not undo the harm, basically prevent it. And in case of this, individuals also react. And that's what you are seeing in these two cases. So when the words like lynching are used, and you know this better, Jasleen, I mean, history of lynching is completely different. This is a problem with how media frames this without understanding and locating it in the Sikh frame. So that's not the right word. Lynching is not the right word. Torture is not the right word. We can say this is what one of the reactions is. And the reaction is because this is what somebody did. So it is definitely, there is a politics to it. If with all the evidence, they're not still concluding, there means something political is attached to it. Simple as that. And in cases where they do conclude in certain commissions and they don't implement the solutions, which means it's still also political because they are not implementing the solution. So in those two absences, in those two cases, and maybe there will be more cases, who knows, because this is ever continuous thing. What else are Sikhs supposed to do? Should they keep waiting for 40 years? Should they not react like you would react in your home if somebody did this to your folks? So that's what you end up seeing. Can we justify certain actions? My question will be, I think that's a wrong question. We don't need to justify anything. Human emotions come out in variety of forms. They're convoluted with the politics of the time. Who really knows what happened?
Yeah, no, this is all great and really helpful. And I think even though these two cases have been kind of on the forefront because they're the most recent and they were the most focused on in the media, I think maybe if we can end this conversation by coming back to this larger question of, what is Beadbi and how do we understand it? What are the kind of questions that we ought to be asking ourselves? And how can we locate our understandings in these larger contexts? I think these are all questions that we can leave with. And if you have any closing thoughts on, what conversations we ought to be having, either with ourselves or amongst our communities, or any kind of guidance on how to take that internal reverence into that external, I think any of that would be helpful, a helpful way to end.
So, I'll put it in those two terms again, internal and external, the inner and then the manifestation of that in public. So personal life and public lives, or Panthic lives. So look, personally, just like we invoke the word soda in extreme case, I think we need to invoke the word tankha in Sikh inner case. What tankha literally means salary, but Sikh parlance uses this when I, as an individual, accept I have been irreverential. We have also reduced that to kind of a folly, even in the public and the Panthic cases. We need to become serious about our personal tankhas, that this is the salary I'm receiving, which means I am willing to do this because I have been irreverential. I think we really need to have reflections on that. Bhai Nandlal Goya's writing, the Sikh parlance within Guru Granth Sahib in historical traditions, even in Sikh Rahat Maryada, when we look at it, it uses the word tankha. Individual Sikh who claims to be a self-identified Sikh, when they violate their own principles and when they violate their own protocols, but at the highest level, when they are being irreverential. So I think that requires, this is the reflection part. We do reflections so we know when something happens how to react. That time, the reflections is what will carry a response. And then externally, we need to also be very, very clear that when we do see these incidents, how we explain it. We don't need to find excuses for them. We must own up to it. But we really need to explain what is our relationship with the Guru. And we will do anything and everything to protect that relationship, because that's what we do as human beings. The deeper the relationship, the highest levels of responses, including giving up our own head. This is what the Sikh word says. We will do that, and we have done so, and we will do more of that. So externally, we need to, while we continue to work with the laws of the land, And we do actually. I mean, 400 cases and 2 external responses, you do the math. We are not extremists as the media presents us. We are not the people who are doing lynchings here. That's a complete misappropriation of the word. It is actually, we should be presented as being people who have such a exhaustion we have been going through, following literally the dictum of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, that we will exhaust all means before we pick up a sword. What else does exhaustion means? Waiting 40 years, waiting for one case, like in the case of Nakoda, to be dealt with, waiting 7 years in the last Sarbat Khalsa incident, waiting 3 years when the last Punjab government's commission has expired, going through 2 governments. So all of this is really our patience. So let's tell our story right. I'm really interested in every Sikh must get this narrative right. We are very much capable. We are that non-violence of the strong people, right? That's the phrase we have used before. That we are capable of doing anything and everything, but we are very patient. We follow civil disobedience. We are very forgiving. We understand mental incapacity or insanity in some cases, but it cannot be the case when it's that much systematic and widespread. So our narrative needs to be understood, and our reverence needs to be understood. And then collectively, let's be more deliberative. I think we are very deliberative as a community, and we can become even more deliberative and demand more from our institutions.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to end. And I'm glad that everybody gets to be kind of privy to the workings through of this issue that we've gone through in our own conversations. So thank you very much. Before we...
Absolutely. And I just remembered something, because Bhai Nanlal Goya actually says, because we didn't touch on this a little bit, and I forgot that, these words like sacrilege and blasphemy, so Bhai Nanlal Goya actually talks about that blasphemy is within. The world is after the outside blasphemy. So we need to deal with the internal one. So our conversation, I think, also gave me a chance to rethink certain things as to how we need to be talking about it. Because people did ask us. I remember getting emails, how come you guys haven't done a webinar or a podcast or a write-up on it? And we're like, well, we need to understand how many people are interested in understanding this. Most people are understanding and say either it's wrong or right. Well, that's not our place. We are not the people who are going to say what is wrong or right. The ethicists can deal with this. But this is an issue which every Sikh must understand, especially every self-identified Sikhs, if they have any relationship with Guru Granth Sahib, and we know we all do. So let's have that internal blasphemy conversation. Let's have this internal irreverential conversation with the self. And a byproduct of that will be these conversations, which we are having publicly in a somewhat transparent manner here. And I'm glad you pushed for it. And I know it's taken us a couple of weeks to go through this, but I'm glad we are doing it, because I think this is a very serious and a very important, to be honest, a very personal conversation for all Sikhs.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better. I think a lot of this that has stuck with me is about that personal reflection. And so I think it'll stick with me throughout my journey, because that kind of coming back to what is my relationship with the Guru is such an important question, and how it manifests in all the different ways. So thank you once again. And before we kind of sign off, I wanted to ask if there's anything coming up soon that we ought to mention for people to get excited about or to attend.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think at Sikh Research Institute, we are looking at how do we start some more in this, as we are going from, in COVID era is now going from pandemic to endemic, right? That's our hope. So we are looking into doing more physical events, in-person events, in smaller crowds. So look out for that. I know something is in the making in New Jersey as well as in British Columbia. So more of that. And then also you and I recently, with help of many others, just published a report on charity and giving. This idea of Sikhi and giving, what really is charity and what really is philanthropy, this whole idea of giving. So we invite people to read that report and give us feedbacks on that. Tear it apart, tell us, so we can do a better job on the next one. Hopefully, we are raising some questions which nobody's raising as to how do we hold all Sikh non-profits accountable, not just the SGPCs, but including Sikh Research Institute.
Great. Thank you so much. With
Guru
that,
Fateh.
Guru Fateh.
You were listening to Sikhcast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.